Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of State of Mind. This will be part 46, the second half to chapter 27. Kirishima helped Shoto lift Izuku up, carrying him outside. I'm sorry we took so long, Izuku. Everything's going to be okay now. Izuku smiled, tucking his forehead against Shoto's neck. I know. His voice was rough, his throat already beginning to bruise from the strangling, and his shoulder was bleeding. Shoto carried Izuku out, the lava rain turning into regular rain, hitting everyone. Izuku hissed a breath out between his teeth when Shoto decided they'd come far enough and crouched, setting him down to lean against a broken piece of concrete, jutting out from the ground. Next to him, Ito set his mom down as well, looking her over for injuries as she watched up at her fiancé soundlessly, eyes full of adoration. Why did you leave, Izuku? Why didn't you wake me up? Izuku slid his gaze to Shoto. His voice sounded hurt, desperate, and his hands pressed painfully into Izuku's shoulder. I didn't want to put you in danger, Izuku forced out, eyes half-lidded. His gaze going to the hole in the warehouse. He could see All Might punting a random villain through the roof, kicking another one in the back. He fought them off like they were nothing, Mike and Aizawa and the majority of Izuku's class playing support. He could hear Bakugo screaming as the sounds of explosions ripped apart the night. Akuma was nowhere to be seen. Izuku forced his eyes back to Shoto when he felt pressure on his shoulder, Kirishima wrapping bandages around his wound. Izuku, please don't decide what is too dangerous for me. I want to be there for you, but you've got to give me the chance. Yeah, Izuku whispered, eyes shutting. I'm sorry. Shoto suddenly shook him, and Izuku's eyes snapped open. You said you think you were drugged. Do you know what with? Izuku frowned. No, it was a quirk. Stabbed my shoulder and then felt bad. Me too. Inko turned her head toward their small group. He didn't stab me, just... She flexed her fingers in a weird motion, and then set her head back down roughly, hair spilling across the ground. Izuku's back went rigid, eyes widening. I feel him near, he whispered. I think someone has a quirk to make things invisible. Ito suddenly looked up, straightening, eyes widening just as something grabbed Izuku by the back of his head, hand wrenching at his long hair. He cried out in surprise, feet pedaling as he was yanked to the side, Shoto reaching out to grab him but missing. Izuku thrust his hands backwards, trying to reach whoever was there. I don't think so. A slimy voice whispered in his ear, and he felt something sharp press against the soft flesh beneath his Adam's apple, right against the scar Shigaraki had given him. In front of him, both Kirishima and Shoto were on their feet, quirks activated, Shoto alight with fire on half of his body and ice gathering on the other. Peppermint, stay back, Izuku gasped out. He could feel heat next to his ear. His father had always run hotter than the average person, and his quirk made him very resistant to heat and fire, which was probably why he seemed mostly unscathed by Izuku's lava rain. Izuku inhaled evenly, the sensitive scar tissue scraping against the cold of the metal. His fingers twitched as he prepared himself to summon something he'd hidden away. Anything. Just before Izuku could summon, Ito spoke up, standing in front of Inko, his face blank. Hey, asshole, he growled, voice strangely low for how he usually was. I can see you. The red-haired man tapped his gold-rimmed glasses with the index finger of one hand while the other reached quickly into the chest of his sport jacket, a devious snarl foreign on his usually docile face. The movements belied the pulling out of a gun, but somehow it still took Izuku by surprise when his mother's fiancé removed a Glock from his jacket like it was nothing, pointing it seemingly at Izuku while Akuma turned, holding him even more tightly against him, rivulets of blood dripping down his neck. Izuku glanced sideways at Shoto and tried to convey to him that he needed to stay put, the other boy getting more antsy over the sounds of Izuku's breathing, rough in his own ears. The world seemed frozen, a distinct moment in time. The air itself seemed to glitter and fragment, warping from the effects of whatever was in Izuku's system. His lungs filled, their weights heavy in Izuku's chest. Shoto's eyes shined, multicolored and faceted, conveying so many emotions in a simple gaze, gray and turquoise, meeting green electric. A hot breath hissed out by Izuku's ear, and he was pulled back several steps. Several things happened at once. The world sped up. The sudden change was like fire across Izuku's skin, like he was burning alive with the harsh memory of his father's quirk. He remembered the fight with Muscular, the savior of the fight, the katana from Stain. He remembered, and he summoned it to his hand, and drove it back without looking. A screech of pain right by his head, nearly deafening him, told him he'd hit the mark. The gun went off, brushing Izuku's side to embed itself in the man behind him, his scream rising, a pillar of flame erupting next to his ear, the heat scalding before Shoto grabbed his arm and yanked him away like a doll. Izuku's legs scrambled across dry ground, tangling over each other, pitching him forward. Shoto caught him against his chest, spinning around to shield him from the flames, a wall of ice coming up between Ito, Inko, Izuku, and leaving Akuma to Kirishima. Izuku gagged from the movement, nauseous, his stomach doing flips as if it thought it was suddenly a professional acrobat. "It's okay," Shoto murmured. Izuku could smell burning hair and groaned. "My hair," he groaned. "I was growing that side out again. Ugh." Shoto snorted. "What is it with you and focusing on insignificant things during intense situations?" Izuku didn't answer, not trusting himself to form another complete sentence. There was the sound of fighting going on behind the ice, more fighting in front of them, in the warehouse. Izuku went lax against Shoto, and the boy dropped to his knees from the sudden weight. "Izuku, what's wrong?" Shoto turned Izuku's head, lifting one knee for his boyfriend to lean against. Izuku's eyes were bright and brimming with tears, the pupils dilated. "I used to be so alone," he murmured. Shoto's heart stuttered. He could vividly remember the way Izuku had looked when he'd entered their classroom on that first day. He'd taken an interest in the green-haired boy as the one who'd gotten first place on the entrance exam. He'd been unimpressed. The other boy had looked meek, lonely, mediocre. The person he held in his arms now was not the same boy that entered their classroom on that first day. Before Shoto could tell Izuku how strong he was, Aizawa was rushing over to them, leaving the rest of the villains to All Might, Mike, and the class, police sirens and lights drawing closer. Izuku interrupted his guardian. "I'm fine. Help Kirishima, he is with—" "Got it," Aizawa said, and disappeared around the wall. Izuku sighed, closing his eyes only to snap them back open when Shoto shook him. "Izuku," he murmured. "Promise me you'll never just rush into something like this alone again. You're not alone anymore. You have so many people you can rely on. People that would die for you, Izuku." Breath catching in his chest, Izuku smiled shakily, tears leaking from the corners of his eyes. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to, only leaning into Shoto, his world a whirlpool of warmth and cold as the rain eased up, the storm clouds beginning to clear, rays of evening light breaking through. With how injured Akuma was and having Aizawa and Kirishima working together, the villain didn't stand a chance, Aizawa binding him and leaving him on the ground. So much like trash. The warehouse group finished their work, every villain beaten, retrieved, and tied up inside, even the one All Might had punted. The police arrived soon after that, and Izuku was loaded into an ambulance and taken to the hospital. Despite his injuries being less than severe, they needed to check his blood and figure out what he'd been drugged with. Shoto never left his side, even so much as raising a brow at him in the back of the ambulance. "Looks like you're bleeding in that shirt again." Izuku looked down at the blood-smeared skeleton astronaut on his shirt, frowning. "Damn it," he muttered. Shoto shook his head. "I'll buy you as many as you need, Izuku, but try not to ruin another one, please, at least for a little bit." Izuku smiled at him, leaning back against the cot with a sigh. "I'll do my best." After that, things were dealt with mostly away from Izuku. He had to speak with Tsukauchi, relaying some of his childhood so that they could tack on child abuse to Akuma's multiple charges, expanding his several lifetimes of sentences in Tartarus. What they'd been drugged with had been some unknown sedative, completely unique to the villain's quirk. Mostly it just seemed to make him feel nauseous, dizzy, and made it harder to move and see straight. He could see how it could be useful in a lot of villainous situations, and it made Izuku feel sick, especially when he learned about some of the things that particular villain was being charged with. Izuku visited Inko before he left the hospital, and his mom apologized profusely for telling Hisashi about his quirk. But he'd held Yuki's life on the line. She hadn't had a choice. There was no use blaming her, and Izuku truly wasn't mad about it. Most people would have done the same in her shoes. He told her to get better, and that he would see her soon before waving to Ito and heading out, joining Shoto. Izuku returned to the dorms and hugged Wink and Eri together for a straight hour before grabbing a blanket and a pillow and collapsing in the middle of the common room, in front of the TV, with the both of them. He played Frozen 2 for Eri and quickly began collecting more and more of his class. When the movie finally ended, Eri and Wink were asleep and almost all of the class was there. Izuku cleared his throat, leaning back against Shoto's legs, who was resting on the couch above him with a book. At Izuku's noise, the class looked toward him, listening. I never got the chance to thank you all," Izuku said softly, picking at his new shirt. "So, thank you." Ochako grinned, tapping Izuku's knee. "Of course we would come, silly. You're like a brother to me at this point." Izuku blinked in surprise, looking around at the various nods throughout the classroom. Did they all feel that way? "Yes, we're a family, Kero," Sue said from another couch, and Izuku's eyes widened. He had a family. A real one. Izuku looked down at Eri, who had woken and was looking up at him with huge, innocent eyes. "Family?" she asked. "Of course," Kirishima cheered from his spot on the floor. "We're a big, happy family." Shh. Bakugo turned away, staring at the end credits of the movie. "Big, happy family," the girl whispered, and then the widest, happiest, brightest grin Izuku had ever seen in his life spread shakily across her face. There were many gasps, all of them realizing what a momentous occasion this was. Her first smile. They had a dance party on the lawn of Heights Alliance after that, and Izuku finally got Shoto to dance to Let It Go for Eri, the boy creating ice sculptures for her, while twirling startlingly well on the ice. Eri shrieked with happiness, clapping her hands together sweetly before running forward. Shoto grunted in surprise as the small girl leapt upward, straight into his arms. Shoto caught her, holding her against his chest. "Eri?" "Big brother!" She looked up at him, a small smile on her face. Shoto looked over at Izuku with uncertainty. The green-haired boy was off to the side, struggling to bring something he'd created with pure imagination out of his mindscape again, like he had with that katana. But he caught Shoto's look and smiled reassuringly at him, flapping a hand at him as if telling him to get going, make Eri happy. Shoto sighed, dropping one hand to make a layer of ice across the ground, wide enough to cover the grass, thick enough to hold the class's weight as they stepped onto it excitedly, even Izuku drawn away from his quirk practice, moving toward them. Eri giggled as Shoto moved his feet in ovals, skating backward in his shoes. It would have been a lot easier with skates, but he hadn't known about this impromptu adventure beforehand, and hadn't grabbed them from his room. Eri didn't seem to mind, though, as Shoto picked up the pace, knees slightly bent. He used to do this a lot when he was younger, when he knew that Endeavor would be gone for a long time on a mission, and his siblings were asleep. He'd head outside, to the garden, stopping in the middle where the water fountain was, and he'd ice the entire area. And then he'd just skate. His mom taught him how before she left for the hospital, and Shoto had never really stopped. He wasn't a figure skater in any capacity, but he was definitely experienced on the ice. He flipped around, moving forward now, and Eri released a screech of excitement, fingers tight in his shirt. At the edge of the ice, Izuku was filming, smiling happily. Shoto ducked down, holding Eri's back above the ice as he used their momentum to spin. Once they slowed down, Shoto swung Eri up and out, her weight adding speed to their twirl, and Eri practically screamed in happiness, grinning so brightly it was almost blinding. Some of the other students had stopped to watch now as Shoto whispered down to Eri, getting faster and faster as he maneuvered skillfully around his classmates with just his peripherals. "Want to spin?" "Yeah!" she yelled, bouncing in his hold. Shoto smiled and threw a leg out, dragging it lightly against the ice before lifting, nearly tossing them into a rapid spin. It wasn't as fast as it would have been with skates, and it was harder to control, but Eri didn't seem to care, screaming with glee as they spun. Eventually, she started to feel sick, though, and Shoto set her down, watching her stumble over to Ochako and Ida. Shoto looked back at Izuku, who was smiling, pushing his phone back in his pocket, beginning to turn around and head back to his place in the grass. "Izuku, wait," Shoto called, sliding to the edge of the ice and stepping off, grabbing Izuku's arm, then sliding down to take his hand when he turned. "Your turn. Come on." Izuku looked sheepish. I've never been ice skating or anything before. I don't think I should." "It's fine," Shoto responded, pulling Izuku lightly, giving him the choice to leave or follow his pull onto the ice. Izuku let Shoto pull him onto the ice, gasping when he immediately started sliding, grabbing onto Shoto's arm tightly, like he was his lifeline. Shoto smiled, gliding Izuku further onto the ice, moving backward, his arm clutched in Izuku's killer grip. "Shoto, I'm definitely gonna fall," Izuku hissed between his teeth. "That's okay," Shoto whispered, oblivious to everyone taking pictures around them, as Shoto leaned closer. "I'll be there to pick you up every time." Izuku looked up at Shoto through his eyelashes, suddenly shy, aware of the connotation behind those words, aware of what Shoto truly meant by them. Shoto only smiled, wrapping his hands around Izuku's forearms and spinning him. Izuku let out a yelp, feet scrambling, his body turning one way, his feet going the other. He fell, and Shoto grabbed him, keeping him from face-planting, but their combined weight had them both tumbling. Izuku laughed, grabbing Shoto's hand, the chill ice piercing through his hair and cutting into his head. Shoto stood with ease and stretched out a hand. I told you I'd help you up. Izuku didn't budge, his smile transforming into a smirk. No, I believe you said you would pick me up. Shoto glanced up past Izuku at Ochako, who was nodding rapidly in agreement with Izuku as she slid by. I hope you know I'll do it, Shoto stated flatly, and, as expected, Izuku rolled, gathering his hands and feet under him and carefully standing on his own, arms at his sides and legs in a wide stance. His balance careful. This is difficult, Izuku breathed. Shoto shrugged. Well, it's good for your balance skills. Izuku looked hurt, leaning back. Excuse me, I'll have you know that I was a gymnast. I have great balance. Who are you kidding, nerd? Bakugo yelled, sliding by expertly, no trouble whatsoever. You're the clumsiest person I've ever met in my life. Izuku scowled and looked up at Shoto. I can have good balance and be clumsy at the same time. Shoto raised an eyebrow but shrugged. Well, it's still good to practice ice skating, for if we ever work together after graduating. It'll be a good skill to have. Izuku blinked, tilting his head at Shoto. You want to work together one day? Warmth pulled in Shoto's cheeks and he shrugged, lowering his body temperature to control his blush. Of course I do. Izuku grinned, reaching out to grab Shoto's hand. Me too. Izuku took a moment after he'd been trying to skate for a bit. He looked out across the frozen field at his class and wondered what he would do without all these people, what his life would be like if he'd never met them. He'd been blind to his rage before, storming in, forgetting that there were people, a whole family, to back him up at times like that. They'd come after him without a second thought to rescue him. He was glad they were in his life. He had to wipe tears away before happily rejoining Shoto and Eri as they chased each other across the ice. They skated nearly into the night before finally heading inside for a big dinner, courtesy of Bakugo and Izuku actually working together, the two of them being the biggest and best cooks in the class. If there was one thing they could work on together, it was making food. Aizawa, Mike, Eri, and All Might all smelled the food and joined them, all of them eating together. After the recent fight, All Might's time had depleted even more, to the point where he could only maintain his muscle form for a few minutes. It was fortunate he was already retired, and the world already knew of his smaller form. Otherwise, he'd be in quite the pickle right about now, in his words. The meal was great, as always, and that night Izuku took Wink to Shoto's bedroom, curling up in his futon, with Wink between them, their fingers interlaced. They were bathed in soft starlight, coming in through the cracks of the curtains that covered Shoto's balcony. The glass doors were shut to make sure Wink didn't get out, and the room was cozy. Shoto's touch soft as he traced a scar on his wrist, hand trailing up to lightly touch the star-shaped scar on his right bicep. I gave you this one, didn't I? He asked gently. So what? Izuku shrugged his hand away, grasping it in his own. That's long past, and it's the only scar of my many scars that I like. Shoto sighed, taking his hand away and rolling onto his back. He seemed to be thinking deeply, so Izuku left him to it. Good night, Peppermint, he said, drawing Wink against his chest, her head lifting to bump his chin. Shoto rolled back to his side, looking at Izuku, the whites of his eyes almost glowing in the starlight. Good night, Izuku. Izuku was done with being on his own. He had a family now, an amazing one. He wasn't alone anymore. He wasn't alone. All right, listeners, this concludes the second half to Chapter 27 of State of Mind. Chapter 28, which is the last chapter and will also be the last part, is going to be up next. I hope you all have enjoyed this journey so far. I've really enjoyed recording and working on this podfic. I'm really excited for the last chapter to come up next. Let me know your thoughts and reactions that you had to Chapter 27 here as we finish this one up. Drop your comments below for me. And as always, thank you all so much for listening.